The laughter stopped dead. I stood there in the middle of the Marriott ballroom, my Louboutin heels clicking against the marble floor, watching Marcus Green's smirk dissolve like sugar in rain. The same Marcus who used to call me Thunder Thighs in the hallways. The same Marcus whose friends would moo when I walked past their lunch table. The same Marcus who once told me I'd never amount to nothing but another baby mama collecting welfare checks. His mouth hung open now. Phone still raised from when he'd been scrolling through my company's Forbes feature, the one with my face on the cover under the headline, 30 under 30, the fitness tech revolutionary who built a $50 million empire. That's you? Regina Carter whispered, her perfectly contoured face pale beneath her foundation. Regina, who had organized the Fat Girl Olympics during PE class, making me run last in every relay while she and her crew recorded it on their phones. The whole reunion had gone silent. 34 years old, and I was right back in that cafeteria, holding my lunch tray, looking for somewhere, anywhere, to sit. Except this time I wasn't that scared, broken girl anymore. This time I owned the room. Surprised? I asked, my voice carrying across the ballroom with the confidence that came from presenting to venture capitalists, from closing million-dollar deals, from building something that mattered. I guess some of us actually kept our promises. Marcus's basketball Letterman jacket, yes, he was still wearing it, suddenly looked pathetic instead of intimidating. Regina's designer knockoff dress couldn't hide the desperation in her eyes. The whole scene felt surreal, like watching my past and present collide in slow motion. But what made this moment truly perfect wasn't just their shock. It wasn't even the way the rest of our classmates were pulling out their phones, Googling my name, whispering among themselves as my success story unfolded before their eyes. No. What made it perfect was the quiet man in the corner, Jordan Mitchell, who had never laughed at my expense, never joined in the cruelty, never made me feel less than human. He was watching me with something that looked like pride, maybe even admiration, and for the first time in 15 years, I felt like that awkward teenager's pain had finally been worth something. The girl they had broken was gone. In her place stood a woman who had turned their cruelty into fuel, their doubts into determination, and their predictions about my future into the biggest lie they'd ever told. This was my moment. Our 10-year reunion had become my victory lap, and honey, I was just getting started. Where are you watching this from? Drop your city in the comments. I love seeing where my stories reach around the world. Now let me take you back to where this all began. I almost didn't go. That invitation had been sitting on my kitchen counter for 3 weeks, the gold-embossed letters catching the morning light every time I made my coffee. Atlanta high school class of 2009, 15-year reunion. Every time I looked at it, my stomach twisted into the same knots I used to get walking through those hallways. Girl, you better not even be thinking about skipping, Tasha said, bursting into my Buckhead penthouse like she owned the place. She'd been doing that since we were 16, showing up exactly when I needed her most, whether I wanted her to or not. Her box braids were a vibrant purple this time, matching the energy she brought everywhere she went. I'm not skipping, I lied, watching her plop down on my Italian leather couch and prop her feet up on my glass coffee table. I'm just reconsidering the value of reliving high school trauma for the sake of small talk and cash bar cocktails, Tasha snorted. Trauma? Baby, you're a millionaire CEO who just graced the cover of Forbes magazine. What trauma? You won! She picked up the framed magazine from my coffee table, waving it in the air like evidence in court. Look at this gorgeous woman right here. Look at those cheekbones, that glow, that I run a empire energy. That's you, Aisha Johnson. That's my best friend who built FitSoul from nothing but determination and a laptop she bought with her tax refund. I sank into the armchair across from her, pulling my silk robe tighter around me. Outside, Atlanta's skyline glittered in the afternoon sun, a view I'd paid $2 million for, partly because I could afford it, but mostly because it proved to myself every morning that I'd made it out. Made it up, made it matter. You don't understand, I said quietly. It's not about what I've accomplished. It's about them. It's about walking back into that room and feeling like that girl again. The one who ate lunch in the bathroom stall because sitting alone in the cafeteria hurt worse than the smell of industrial bleach and teenage desperation. Tasha's expression softened. She'd been there for all of it, the day Marcus and his crew cornered me after gym class, oinking and making pig sounds until I cried. The time Regina posted that photo of me changing in the locker room on social media, with the caption, "Whale sighting at Atlanta High." The countless moments when I felt so small, so worthless, that I wondered if they were right about my future. "Honey," she said, leaning forward with that fierce loyalty in her voice that had been my lifeline back then. "Let me tell you what I see. I see a woman who took every cruel word they threw at her and used it to build a ladder to success they couldn't even dream of. I see someone who revolutionized the fitness industry by understanding what it felt like to be overlooked, underestimated, and written off. I see the girl who used to sketch app designs in the margins of her notebooks during calculus class, while Regina was passing notes about which boy she was going to hook up with that weekend." She was right. Of course, FitSoul hadn't just happened by accident. It was born from every moment I'd felt invisible. Every time I'd needed encouragement and found none. Every late night I'd worked out alone in my garage gym because I couldn't afford a membership and was too self-conscious for the ones I could sneak into. The app's core feature, personalized motivation based on emotional state rather than just physical goals, came directly from understanding what it felt like to need someone in your corner when the whole world seemed to be rooting against you. "Remember junior year?" Tasha continued. "When you presented that business plan for Mr. Robinson's entrepreneurship class. Even he was impressed, and that man didn't hand out compliments to anybody. You had vision then, baby. You just also had cruel teenagers trying to dim your light." I did remember. Mr. Robinson had pulled me aside after that presentation, his deep voice gentle but serious. "Miss Johnson, you've got something special here. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Intelligence and determination beat popularity every single time in the real world. But what if it brings it all back?" I whispered, voicing the fear that had been eating at me since that invitation arrived. "What if I walk in there and suddenly I'm 17 again, hiding in oversized hoodies and hoping nobody notices me?" Tasha stood up, walked over to my floor-to-ceiling windows, and gestured toward the city below. "Look around, Aisha. Look at this life you built. You think that scared little girl could have afforded this view? You think she could have walked into a room full of venture capitalists and convinced them to invest 8 figures in her vision? You think she could have built a team of 50 employees who look up to her, respect her, and believe in her leadership?" She was painting my nails electric blue now, her nervous habit when she was trying to make a point. "That girl was never weak, baby. She was gathering strength. Every insult was data. Every cruel laugh was market research. Every time they made her feel small, she was learning exactly what the world needed more of: compassion, understanding, and the kind of success that lifts others up instead of tearing them down." I watched her work, thinking about the journey that had brought me here. The community college years when I worked 3 jobs to pay for business classes. The nights spent learning coding from YouTube videos. The first version of FitSoul that I built in my studio apartment, testing it on myself, and the few friends brave enough to believe in a fat girl's fitness app. The rejection letters from investors who couldn't see past my demographics to my vision. The small victories that eventually became medium victories that became the kind of success that got you on magazine covers. "You know what's funny?" I said, watching the city pulse with life below us. "I spent so many years wanting to prove them wrong, but somewhere along the way, it stopped being about them and started being about everyone like me, everyone who needed to see that their starting point doesn't determine their finish line." Tasha grinned, that mischievous smile that usually meant trouble. "So you're going. It wasn't a question." She knew me too well. "I'm going," I confirmed, feeling something shift inside my chest. Not fear this time, but possibility. But I'm going as CEO Aisha Johnson, not as the girl they used to know. "Honey," she laughed, "that girl grew up to be CEO Aisha Johnson. Don't you dare separate them. She's the reason you fight so hard for the underdog. She's the reason your app has helped over 2 million people find confidence in their bodies. She's the reason you're about to walk into that reunion and show them what real success looks like." The black Hermes dress hung in my walk-in closet like a promise I'd bought it 6 months ago after closing the Series B funding, round $25 million, that had transformed FitSoul from a promising startup into a legitimate player in the wellness tech space. At the time, I'd told myself it was a celebration purchase, a reward for reaching a milestone I'd dreamed about since those early days of bootstrapping with ramen noodles and pure determination. But standing here now, I knew the truth. I'd bought this dress for them, for this moment. "Girl, you're about to shut the whole place down," Tasha said from her perch on my velvet ottoman, watching me hold the dress against my body in the mirror. The fabric was like liquid silk, cut to celebrate every curve I'd learned to love instead of hate. "Remember when you used to wear those baggy jeans and oversized sweaters to hide yourself? Now look at you. You're about to celebrate yourself." The transformation hadn't been just physical, though the physical part was impossible to ignore. 5 years of consistent training, not for punishment, but for joy, had sculpted my body into something I'd never imagined possible at 17. My shoulders were strong from deadlifts that had taught me I could carry more than I ever believed. My legs were powerful from squats that had shown me I could rise from any low point. My core was solid from planks that had taught me the value of holding steady when everything around me shook. But the real transformation lived in my posture now, the way I carried myself like I belonged in any room I entered. It lived in my voice, which had found its power through presentations to investors who initially dismissed me. It lived in my eyes, which no longer searched for approval, but offered it to others instead. "I keep thinking about what Mr. Robinson used to say," I murmured, applying the MAC lipstick, a deep burgundy called Diva, that had become my signature. "That success is the best revenge, but happiness is the best success." Mr. Robinson was a smart man, Tasha agreed. "But you know what? You got both. You're successful and happy. That's what's going to shock them the most. Not your money, not your magazine covers, but the fact that you genuinely like yourself now." She was right. The girl who used to practice smiling in the bathroom mirror, trying to find an angle that didn't reveal her insecurity, had become a woman who smiled because she had reasons to. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It was built from small victories, daily affirmations, and the gradual realization that other people's opinions of me were none of my business. "Remember when you started FitSoul?" Tasha continued, now applying her own makeup in my bathroom mirror. "You were so scared to put your face on the app's promotional materials, said you didn't look like what people expected from a fitness guru." I laughed at the memory. Those early marketing meetings where I'd suggested using stock photos instead of my own image, terrified that potential users would take one look at my before pictures and decide I wasn't qualified to help them transform their lives. It had taken my business partner David weeks to convince me that my story was FitSoul's greatest asset. "Your vulnerability is your superpower," he'd said during one particularly heated discussion about our brand identity. "People don't need another perfect fitness influencer telling them what to do. They need someone who understands what it's like to feel uncomfortable in their own skin and found a way through it." He'd been right. FitSoul's user testimonials weren't about achieving some impossible standard of perfection. They were about finding peace with yourself, one workout at a time. Our tagline, "Your body, your journey, your soul," had resonated with millions of people who were tired of fitness culture that made them feel worse about themselves instead of better. "Okay. Real talk," Tasha said, turning serious as she applied her mascara. "Are you nervous about seeing Marcus?" The question hit exactly where she'd aimed it. Marcus Green. Even his name made my chest tighten a little, not because I still carried feelings for him, but because he represented the version of myself I'd worked so hard to outgrow. We'd dated for 3 months junior year, my first and only high school relationship, and he'd ended it the cruelest way possible. "I think we should just be friends," he'd said in front of his entire lunch table, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I mean, you're cool and all, but I got a reputation to think about, you know?" His friends had laughed. Regina had smirked from her table nearby, and I had died a little inside, right there in the cafeteria between the pizza line and the recycling bins. "I'm not nervous about Marcus," I said, surprised to realize it was true. "I'm curious about him. What kind of man he became. Whether he ever learned that reputation built on making others feel small doesn't actually make you big." Tasha nodded approvingly. "That's growth, honey. That's real power. When you can look at someone who hurt you and feel curiosity instead of anger." I slipped into the dress, and it fit like it had been designed specifically for the woman I'd become, not the girl I'd been. The mirror reflected back someone I barely recognized from those yearbook photos. Confident posture, genuine smile, eyes that held secrets worth knowing instead of shame worth hiding. "You know what I realized?" I said, fastening the diamond earrings I'd bought myself for my 30th birthday. "They're going to see this dress, these shoes, the success story, and they're going to think that's what changed. But the real transformation happened in my mind, in my heart. Everything else is just evidence." Evidence of what? Evidence that the girl they underestimated was exactly who she was supposed to become. Tasha stood up and hugged me, careful not to mess up our makeup. "That's my best friend right there. That's the woman who's about to remind a whole room of people that their high school predictions don't mean shit in the real world." As we prepared to leave, I caught one last glimpse of myself in the full-length mirror. The woman looking back at me was someone the 17-year-old Aisha would have been proud to become, not just because of the external success, but because of the internal peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing your worth isn't determined by other people's ability to see it. "You ready?" Tasha asked, grabbing her clutch. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of 15 years of growth settle into my bones like armor made of self-love and hard-earned wisdom. "I'm ready." The Marriott downtown Atlanta looked exactly the same as it had for every school dance, every homecoming celebration, every milestone event that had marked our teenage years. But walking through those familiar doors in my Hermes dress and Louboutin heels, I felt like I was entering a different dimension, one where the scared girl I used to be existed only as a memory, not a prophecy. "Damn, they went all out," Tasha whispered, adjusting her own stunning outfit, a gold sequined number that caught every light in the room. The decorating committee had transformed the ballroom with our school colors, navy and gold, complete with blown-up yearbook photos rotating on digital screens around the room. "Look, there's your senior portrait." I followed her gaze to see my 18-year-old face projected on the wall. Round cheeks, uncertain smile, eyes that held more hope than confidence. The girl in that photo had written in her yearbook profile that she wanted to make a difference in people's lives someday. She'd had no idea she was prophetic. Ms. Johnson. "Is that really you?" I turned to see Mrs. Patterson, our old English teacher, approaching with the kind of genuine excitement that reminded me why I'd loved school despite everything else. She looked exactly the same, silver hair in a neat bob, reading glasses hanging from a colorful chain, smile that had made Shakespeare accessible to a room full of teenagers. "Mrs. Patterson." I hugged her warmly, feeling some of my nervousness evaporate. "You look amazing. Thank you for being here." "Are you kidding? I wouldn't miss seeing how all my students turned out. And you, my dear, have certainly made quite the impression on the world." She gestured toward one of the digital screens, which had switched to a photo of me from the Forbes article. "I always knew you had something special. Remember that essay you wrote about resilience? I still use it as an example in my classes." I did remember. The butterfly complex. A piece about how transformation requires darkness before beauty, pressure before strength. I'd written it during my darkest period in high school, when the bullying had reached its peak, and I'd seriously considered transferring schools. That essay saved my sanity, I admitted. Writing about pain helped me understand it wasn't permanent. Mrs. Patterson squeezed my arm. "The best writers always mind their deepest truths. I'm so proud of the woman you've become." As she walked away to greet other former students, I felt a shift in my energy. The familiar anxiety that had plagued me for weeks was being replaced by something unexpected. Excitement. I belonged here, not as a returning victim seeking validation, but as a success story worth celebrating. "There's Jordan," Tasha said, nodding toward the bar area. Jordan Mitchell stood exactly where I remembered him, slightly apart from the crowd, observing rather than performing. He'd always been like that, present but not pushy, kind but not trying to prove it. He'd been in my AP classes, always respectful, never participating in the social cruelty that seemed to entertain so many of our classmates. He looked good. Really good. The lanky teenager had grown into a man who wore his confidence quietly. Tailored suit, genuine smile, the kind of presence that drew people in without demanding attention. "Go talk to him," Tasha urged. But before I could respond, another voice cut through the ambient noise of reunion conversation. Well, well, well. Look what the cat dragged in. Regina Carter. The voice that had haunted my teenage nightmares was exactly the same, that particular mix of sweetness and venom that had made her so effective at social destruction. I turned to face her, and for just a moment, I was 17 again, armor cracking under the weight of anticipated cruelty. But then I looked, really looked, at the woman in front of me. Regina was still beautiful, but it was the kind of beauty that required constant maintenance, constant effort. Her designer dress couldn't hide the desperation in her eyes, the way she was still performing for an audience that had grown up and moved on. Regina, I said calmly, my voice carrying the confidence that had been built through years of boardroom presentations and tough negotiations. You look exactly the same. She preened at what she took as a compliment, missing the subtle observation in my tone. Thank you. I work very hard to maintain myself. Some of us understand the importance of keeping up appearances. Her eyes scanned my outfit with barely concealed surprise. Though I have to say, you've certainly changed. That dress must have cost a fortune. It did, I replied simply, refusing to take the bait of defensiveness. But fortunately, I can afford it now. Regina's smile flickered, just for a second, but I caught it. The first crack in her perfect facade. Oh, what are you doing now? Let me guess. You're working for some tech company? Customer service? The assumption was so perfectly Regina, still defining people by her limited imagination of their possibilities. Still unable to conceive that the girl she'd tormented might have exceeded every prediction they'd made about my future. Something like that, I said with a slight smile, enjoying the moment before the revelation. I work in tech, yes. Fitness technology specifically. Oh, how nice. Like selling gym memberships or something? Tasha made a small sound beside me. Not quite a laugh, not quite a cough, but definitely amused. She knew what was coming. We'd practiced this moment, though I'd never imagined it would be quite this perfect. Not exactly, I said, letting my smile widen. I'm the CEO and founder of FitSoul. Maybe you've heard of it? The silence that followed was everything I'd dreamed it would be. Regina's carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the shock that drained the color from her face. Her mouth opened and closed like she was trying to form words but couldn't quite access them. FitSoul, she repeated slowly. The app that's everywhere right now? The one that was on Good Morning America last month? That's the one, I confirmed, watching her mental calculations play across her features. We just closed a $25 million funding round. Forbes called it revolutionary wellness technology. But then, I suppose you already know that, since my face was on their cover last month. Regina's perfect smile was cracking at the edges now. The social hierarchy she'd built her entire identity around was crumbling in real time. The girl she'd dismissed as irrelevant had become undeniably, unavoidably relevant. That's incredible, she managed. And for the first time since I'd known her, Regina Carter sounded uncertain. It really is, I agreed. Turns out all those years of understanding what it felt like to be underestimated gave me unique insight into what people actually need from fitness technology. Who knew trauma could be such excellent market research? The comment landed exactly as intended, gentle enough to maintain my dignity, sharp enough to remind her of her role in that trauma. Regina excused herself quickly, mumbling something about needing to find the restroom, leaving behind the faint scent of expensive perfume and cheaper desperation. Holy shit, Tasha whispered once Regina was out of earshot. Did you just break Regina Carter's brain with success? I think I might have, I replied, feeling something that wasn't quite satisfaction but was definitely closure. And you know what? It feels better than I expected. Marcus appeared like a bad memory made flesh. He swaggered over with that same confident stride I remembered from high school. The one that had made teenage me feel special when he'd chosen to notice me, and later made me feel worthless when he'd chosen to discard me. 15 years later, he still wore it like armor, but now I could see the cracks. Aisha Johnson, he said, my name rolling off his tongue with the same casual ownership that had once made me blush. Damn, girl. You clean up nice. He was trying, I had to give him that. The expensive cologne, the designer jeans, the carefully styled fade, all evidence of someone still desperately trying to maintain the image of success. But there was something hollow about it now, like a movie set facade that looked impressive from the front, but revealed itself to be empty scaffolding from any other angle. "Marcus," I replied evenly. "You look familiar." He laughed like I'd complimented him, completely missing the subtle shade. "Yeah, I try to stay in shape, you know. Still playing ball in the men's league, still breaking hearts." He winked, and I felt a strange mix of pity and amusement. This man was 33 years old and still talking like he was 18. "That's nice," I said, glancing around the room. Jordan was still by the bar, but he was watching now, his expression unreadable. Tasha had strategically positioned herself nearby, close enough to intervene if needed, but far enough away to let me handle my own business. "So what you been up to?" Marcus asked, leaning against the high-top table like he was settling in for a long conversation. "Last I heard, you were working at that little gym downtown. Personal training or something?" The assumption stung for just a moment. Not because there was anything wrong with personal training, but because it revealed how completely he'd written off my potential. In his mind, I was still exactly where he'd left me 15 years ago, grateful for his attention, and limited by his imagination of my possibilities. "That was a long time ago," I said. "I've moved on to other things, yeah?" "What kind of other things?" He was scanning my outfit now, the same way Regina had, trying to calculate how someone like me could afford clothes like these. "You still living in Atlanta?" "I am." "Buckhead, actually." His eyebrows rose. "Buckhead? Damn, that's expensive. You must be doing pretty well for yourself. What's the job? You working for some rich family or something?" The condescension was so casual, so automatic, that I almost admired its efficiency. With just a few words, he'd managed to imply that the only way someone like me could afford success was by serving someone else's wealth. The idea that I might have generated my own never even crossed his mind. "Something like that," I replied, keeping my voice neutral, while internally marveling at his consistency. 15 years, and he was still the same person who measured everyone's worth by his own limited understanding of value. "That's cool. That's cool." He nodded approvingly, like he was granting me permission to exist in his proximity. "Always knew you were good with people. Remember how you used to help everybody with homework and shit? You was like the little helper. The little helper. As if kindness was diminishment, as if intelligence was servitude. I felt that familiar teenage rage start to simmer in my chest, but now it was tempered by something he couldn't touch. The unshakable knowledge of my own worth. "I remember helping you pass calculus," I said quietly. "The same calculus you barely understood despite me explaining it to you every day for 3 weeks. He laughed, but there was an edge to it now. "Yeah, you was always the smart one. Too bad that's not everything, right? I mean, book smarts don't necessarily translate to real-world success." And there it was. The same dismissal that had crushed teenage me, delivered with the same casual cruelty that had once made me question my entire value system. But now, instead of crumbling, I felt something else entirely. A crystalline clarity about exactly who Marcus Green had always been and who he'd chosen to remain. "You're absolutely right," I said, letting my smile widen. "Intelligence without execution is just potential. But intelligence with execution, that's power." He blinked, not quite sure how to interpret my agreement. "Exactly. See, you get it. That's why I always liked you. You could see the bigger picture." He gestured broadly, warming to his theme. "Take me, for example. I didn't need to be the smartest guy in the room to be successful. I had natural charisma, leadership qualities. That's what really matters in business." "And what business is that?" I asked, genuinely curious about what version of success he'd constructed for himself. "Real estate," he said proudly. "Been in it for about 8 years now. Just closed my biggest deal last month. $500,000 property. Commission alone was more than most people make in a year." He was boasting, peacocking for my benefit, and I realized with startling clarity that he was still performing the same role he'd played in high school, the popular guy who needed everyone else to witness his success for it to feel real. "That sounds like a solid career," I said diplomatically. "It is. It really is. And you know what the best part is? Freedom. I'm my own boss. Make my own schedule, answer to nobody." He leaned closer, lowering his voice conspiratorially. Plus, I meet a lot of successful women. Doctors, lawyers, business owners. The kind of women who really have their shit together, you know? The implication hung between us like toxic gas. That I, despite everything about how I looked and carried myself, despite the obvious evidence of transformation and success, was still somehow not in that category. Still someone to be condescended to rather than respected. But instead of anger, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Relief that I had never built a life with someone so fundamentally limited in his capacity to see beyond his own assumptions. Relief that his rejection 15 years ago had forced me to find my own path instead of shrinking to fit his narrow vision of my worth. That does sound rewarding, I agreed. Finding people who match your standards. He preened at what he took as validation, completely missing the subtle irony in my tone. Exactly. You always understood me, Aisha. Even back in high school, you saw the real me. I had seen him. That was the tragedy and the gift. I'd seen exactly who he was. Shallow, cruel, limited by his own ego. And I'd loved him anyway. Teenage me had interpreted his attention as validation instead of recognizing it as the scraps it actually was. I did see you, I confirmed. Very clearly. You know what's funny? Marcus continued, oblivious to the shift in energy around us. I was just thinking about you the other day, wondering what happened to sweet little Aisha. Remember how you used to eat lunch by yourself in the corner? Always had your nose in some book or sketching in that little notebook? The memory hit exactly where he'd aimed it. Those lunch periods when I'd chosen isolation over humiliation, when I'd taught myself to find comfort in solitude because the alternative was enduring their entertainment at my expense. I remember, I said simply. Man, you were so serious back then. Always working on some project, always so intense about everything. He shook his head with what he probably thought was fondness, but felt more like mockery. I used to tell the guys, Aisha's gonna be one of those people who works real hard but never gets anywhere because she doesn't know how to play the game. Tasha appeared at my elbow so suddenly I nearly jumped. Her face was carefully neutral, but I could see the storm brewing in her eyes. Excuse me, she said with lethal politeness. I couldn't help but overhear. You were making predictions about people's futures in high school? Marcus turned his attention to her, and I watched him do the same calculation he'd been doing with me. Assessing, categorizing, determining worth based on his limited framework. Tasha Williams, right? Yeah, I remember you. You two were always together. Still are, she said, sliding her arm through mine with casual possessiveness. 15 years of friendship. 15 years of watching Aisha build something incredible while other people were still living in the past. Something flickered across Marcus's face, the first hint that this conversation wasn't going according to his script. Build something? What do you mean? Before I could respond, Jordan Mitchell appeared beside us, carrying 2 glasses of wine. I thought you might need this, he said, offering me one with a smile that was warm without being presumptuous. The bartender recommended the Pinot Noir. Jordan, I said, genuinely pleased to see him. Thank you. How are you? Better now, he replied. And there was something in the way he said it that made my stomach flutter in a way it hadn't since before I'd learned that butterflies could be warnings as easily as promises. But these felt different, steadier, more grounded. Marcus was watching this interaction with growing confusion. In his universe, people like Jordan, quiet, thoughtful, successful without needing to announce it, didn't gravitate toward people like me. His worldview was being challenged in real time, and he was struggling to process it. Jordan Mitchell, Marcus said, extending his hand with forced bonhomie. Man, I haven't seen you since graduation. What you been up to? Corporate law, mostly, Jordan replied, shaking his hand briefly before returning his attention to me. I actually heard about your Forbes feature through my firm's newsletter. We represent several tech companies, and FitSoul came up in our research on emerging wellness platforms. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the reunion playlist switching from one nostalgic hit to another. Marcus's face went through a series of micro-expressions: confusion, disbelief, rapid mental calculation, and finally, something that looked like panic. Forbes? He repeated slowly. FitSoul? I took a sip of wine, savoring both the Pinot Noir and the moment. "I should probably clarify something," I said, my voice carrying just enough authority to command the space. "When you asked what I do for work, I gave you a simplified answer. I told you I work in tech." Marcus nodded, still trying to piece together a puzzle whose final image was becoming clearer by the second. "What I didn't mention is that I own the tech company. FitSoul isn't just where I work, it's what I built. From concept to execution to a current valuation of $50 million. The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples of shock through not just Marcus, but the growing circle of former classmates who had begun gathering around us, drawn by the commotion and the increasingly obvious tension. "50 million, Regina whispered from somewhere behind me. She'd returned from her bathroom escape, probably hoping to witness my social destruction, only to walk into the middle of my resurrection. Marcus's mouth opened and closed several times before any sound emerged. You're the CEO of FitSoul? The fitness app that's been all over the news?" "Founder and CEO," I corrected gently, though I prefer to think of it as a wellness ecosystem rather than just an app. We're revolutionizing how people approach their relationship with their bodies, their health, and their self-worth. Jordan was smiling now, not with surprise, but with something that looked like pride. The Forbes article called her methodology empathy-driven innovation, he added. Apparently, understanding what it's like to feel overlooked gives you unique insight into what people actually need. The crowd around us was growing, phones appearing as people Googled my name, whispered conversations spreading the news through the ballroom like wildfire. I could see the exact moment when recognition dawned on face after face. The girl they'd dismissed, ignored, or tormented had become someone they couldn't afford to dismiss anymore. But how? Marcus was struggling, his entire worldview cracking under the weight of information that didn't fit his carefully constructed narrative. I mean, how did this happen? The same way everything happens, I replied, letting my voice carry to the growing audience. One day at a time, one decision at a time, one small act of courage building on another until you realize you've created something that matters. Tasha squeezed my arm, and I could feel her silent communication. This is your moment. Take it. I looked around the room at the faces surrounding me, some shocked, some impressed, some calculating how quickly they could rewrite their memories of who I'd been to align with who I'd become. But most of them were simply witnessing something they'd never expected to see. The unpopular girl winning. You know what the interesting thing is? I continued, my confidence growing with each word. Every cruel comment, every dismissal, every moment when you made me feel invisible. It all became data. Market research for a demographic you never bothered to understand. The people who feel overlooked, underestimated, written off. Turns out there are millions of us, and we have disposable income. A nervous laugh rippled through the crowd. They weren't sure if I was joking or not, and neither was I. The line between humor and truth was blurring, and I was finding power in that ambiguity. So thank you, I said, raising my wine glass in a mock toast. Thank you for showing me exactly what the world didn't need more of, so I could build something it did. Marcus was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. Aisha, I never meant, we were just kids, you know? Kids say stupid things. They do, I agreed. And then they grow up. Some of them, anyway. The revelation hung in the air like electricity before a storm. I could feel the entire energy of the room shifting, conversations pausing as words spread through the ballroom with the efficiency that only truly shocking news can achieve. The girl they remembered, if they remembered me at all, was being rapidly replaced by a woman they were suddenly desperate to know. "Oh my God, you're the FitSoul lady," squealed Ashley Thompson, who had been Regina's lieutenant in the campaign of teenage cruelty. She pushed through the crowd with the kind of aggressive enthusiasm that suggested she was already rewriting history in her mind. "I use your app every day. It literally changed my life after my divorce." More people pressed closer, phones appearing everywhere as former classmates began documenting their proximity to unexpected success. I watched the social dynamics of our high school years collapse and reassemble in real time. The same people who had once avoided me like unpopularity was contagious were now competing for my attention like relevance was currency. Aisha, "Oh my God, do you remember me? Katie Walsh? I sat behind you in chemistry?" A woman I vaguely recognized thrust her phone toward me, FitSoul's interface glowing on her screen. "I've been using the emotional wellness feature since my mom died last year. The way your app helped me process grief through movement, I can't even explain what that meant to me." And suddenly, the abstract numbers of our user base became real. These weren't just download statistics or engagement metrics. They were actual people whose lives had been touched by something I'd built from pain, determination, and the absolute refusal to let other people's limitations become my own. 2.3 million active users, I said, more to myself than to anyone else. I knew that intellectually, but seeing it here, in person. "It's different when it's real," Jordan said quietly beside me. He'd stayed close as the crowd swelled, not possessively but protectively, like he understood that this level of attention could be overwhelming, even when it was positive. Marcus was still processing, his face cycling through expressions like a broken slot machine. 2.3 million? Jesus, Aisha, the revenue on that must be substantial, I confirmed, choosing not to share the specific numbers that would have made his real estate commissions look like lunch money. But that was never the point. The point was building something that mattered. "Don't be modest," Tasha interjected, appearing with her own glass of wine and a grin that suggested she was enjoying this moment as much as I was. "Tell them about the wellness centers. Tell them about the corporate partnerships. Tell them about the book deal." I shot her a warning look, but she was right. False modesty wasn't going to serve anyone here, least of all the version of myself that had worked 18-hour days to build something from nothing. "We're opening physical wellness centers in 12 major cities this year," I said, my voice gaining strength as I settled into the familiar rhythm of presenting my vision. "The idea is to bridge the gap between digital wellness tools and in-person community support. We're also partnering with major corporations to integrate our methodology into their employee wellness programs." "And the book?" someone called from the back of the crowd. "The empathy advantage. How understanding pain creates powerful solutions," I replied. "It comes out next spring. It's about how lived experience, especially difficult lived experience, can be transformed into innovation that serves others." The crowd murmured appreciatively, but I could see the wheels turning behind their eyes. They were recalculating not just who I was, but who they had been in relation to me. The comfortable narrative of high school hierarchy was crumbling, and they were scrambling to find their place in this new story. "I always knew you were special," said David Chen, who had literally thrown food at me during lunch junior year. The shamelessness of his revision was almost admirable. "You had this quiet intensity, like you were always planning something big." "The only thing I was planning," I replied with dry humor, "was how to get through each day without letting you all see me cry." The honesty landed like a small bomb in the middle of their revisionist attempts. For a moment, the pretense dropped, and everyone remembered exactly who they had been, exactly how they had treated the girl who had become the most successful person in the room. Mr. Robinson appeared at the edge of the crowd, his presence commanding attention without demanding it. At 58, he still carried the quiet authority that had made him one of the few teachers who could maintain order through respect rather than fear. "Miss Johnson," he said, his deep voice cutting through the chatter, "I wondered if that was you I saw on the news last month." The crowd parted to let him through, and I felt that familiar mix of nervousness and eagerness that had always characterized my interactions with the one teacher who had believed in my potential when I couldn't see it myself. "Mr. Robinson," I said, extending my hand, which he ignored in favor of a warm hug. "Thank you for being here. Thank you for everything, actually. I didn't do anything special," he said, stepping back to look at me with undisguised pride. "I just recognized what was already there, though I have to admit, even I didn't anticipate this level of success. You taught me to think systemically," I replied, "to look at problems not as isolated incidents but as symptoms of larger patterns that could be addressed. That's the foundation of everything I built." He nodded thoughtfully. "The entrepreneurship class. I remember your final project. A business plan for a fitness platform that would address the psychological barriers to wellness, rather than just the physical ones. You got the only A+ I gave that semester." The crowd was listening intently now, hungry for origin stories that would help them understand how the transformation had happened. They wanted to identify the moment when the caterpillar had become the butterfly, as if understanding the mechanics of metamorphosis could somehow retroactively align them with the winning side. But you know what I remember most? Mr. Robinson continued, his voice carrying to every corner of our makeshift audience. Your essay about resilience. The butterfly complex, I think you called it. You wrote about how pressure and darkness aren't obstacles to transformation, they're requirements for it. Marcus was staring at me now with an expression I'd never seen before, something that might have been respect or fear, or the dawning realization that he had fundamentally misjudged not just my potential, but the very nature of value itself. I still have that essay, I said softly. I read it sometimes when I need to remember that everything that hurt me also taught me something I couldn't have learned any other way. That's wisdom, Mr. Robinson said. And wisdom applied to action becomes power. You've built something that matters, Miss Johnson, something that helps people. That's the best kind of success. The silence that followed Mr. Robinson's words was different from the shocked quiet that had greeted my earlier revelations. This was deeper, more contemplative. The kind of silence that comes when people are forced to confront not just new information, but new understanding about the very nature of worth and achievement. Marcus was the first to break it, and when he spoke, his voice carried none of its earlier confidence. Aisha, I owe you an apology. A big one. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Apologies weren't part of the reunion script they'd expected. They'd come prepared for nostalgia and networking, not moral reckoning. You don't owe me anything, I replied, and I meant it. The girl who had needed his validation was gone, replaced by a woman who generated her own worth. We were teenagers, Marcus. Cruel, insecure teenagers who didn't know any better? No, he said, shaking his head with a vehemence that surprised me. No, that's too easy. I knew better. I knew you were kind. I knew you were smart. I knew you were working twice as hard as anyone else just to survive in that place. And I chose to tear you down anyway, because it made me feel bigger. Regina had gone very quiet beside him, her perfectly applied makeup unable to hide the fact that she was crying. Not the pretty, delicate tears of someone seeking attention, but the messy, ugly crying of someone confronting the worst version of themselves. I was so jealous of you, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the ambient noise of the ballroom. You had this purpose, this drive. You cared about things that mattered, and I only cared about being seen, being envied, being important in ways that didn't actually mean anything. The admission hit the crowd like a confession in church. Uncomfortable, necessary, and impossible to ignore. I could see people shifting, remembering their own moments of cruelty, their own choices to diminish others in service of their own insecurity. Regina, I started, but she held up her hand. No, let me finish. Please. She wiped at her mascara, leaving dark streaks that somehow made her look more human than I'd ever seen her. I made your life hell because you threatened everything I thought mattered. You were smart without trying, kind without calculating, real without performing. And instead of learning from you, I tried to destroy you. The ballroom had gone completely silent now, even the background music seeming to fade as everyone absorbed this moment of raw honesty. Tasha was gripping my arm, her fingernails digging into my skin as she processed the same shock I was feeling. The worst part, Regina continued, her voice getting stronger, is that I convinced myself it was justified, that you somehow deserved it because you didn't fit into the boxes I understood. But seeing you now, seeing what you built from all that pain we caused, I realize I wasn't just cruel. I was stupid. Cosmically, tragically stupid. Marcus nodded, his own eyes bright with unshed tears. We all were. We had this amazing person right in front of us, someone who was going to change the world. And instead of celebrating that, instead of learning from it, we tried to break it. You didn't break me, I said quietly, and the words carried across the silent room like a prayer. You bent me. You tested me. You forced me to find strength I didn't know I had. And yes, it was painful. Yes, there were nights when I wondered if you were right about my worth. But every time I wanted to give up, I thought about proving you wrong. Every time I wanted to quit, I remembered that someone needed to build the thing I needed and couldn't find. Jordan stepped closer, his presence steady and warm beside me. "That's the difference between you and them," he said, his voice gentle but clear. "They used their pain to hurt others. You used yours to help them." "We could have been different," Marcus said, the words coming out like a confession. "If we'd been brave enough to see past our own insecurity, if we'd been smart enough to recognize what real value looked like, we could have been part of something amazing instead of obstacles to it." "You still can be," I replied, surprising myself with the offer. FitSoul is always looking for people who understand the psychology of transformation. People who know what it's like to be on the wrong side of their own story and want to help others write better endings. The offer hung in the air between us. Not quite forgiveness, not quite friendship, but something more powerful, possibility. The chance for redemption, for growth, for becoming the people they should have been all along. Ashley Thompson, who had been silent since her earlier gushing, spoke up from the crowd. "I think what you built is incredible, but what you're offering now, that's even more incredible. After everything we put you through, you're still willing to see the best in us." "That's not charity," I replied. "That's business. People who have been broken and rebuilt themselves understand the process better than anyone. They make the best healers because they know what healing actually requires." Mr. Robinson was watching this exchange, with the same expression he'd worn during our best classroom discussions, the look of someone witnessing learning happen in real time. "This," he said, gesturing to the space between me and my former tormentors, "this is what real leadership looks like. Not dominance, not revenge, but the courage to transform pain into purpose, and then to share that purpose with others." The crowd began to disperse slowly, conversations resuming but with a different quality now. People were talking quietly, seriously, like they were processing something they hadn't expected to confront at a high school reunion. As the immediate circle around us thinned, Marcus approached me one more time. "Aisha, I meant what I said about the apology, and about wanting to be different. If that offer was serious, it was," I confirmed. "Send me your resume. We'll talk." Regina lingered nearby, clearly wanting to say something but uncertain of her welcome. I walked over to her, extending the same grace I'd offered Marcus. "I meant it for you too," I said. "If you're serious about being different, about building instead of tearing down." She nodded, fresh tears starting. "I don't know if I deserve the chance, but I want to try. I want to be someone my teenage daughter can be proud of, instead of someone she has to apologize for." "Then let's make that happen," I replied. The reunion was winding down, but the energy around me had shifted into something entirely different from what any of us had expected. What had started as a night of nostalgic reminiscence had transformed into something more profound, a real-time demonstration of how growth, forgiveness, and authentic success could reshape even the most painful narratives. Jordan had been quietly present throughout all the conversations, revelations and reconciliations, but now, as the crowd thinned and the immediate drama settled, he stepped closer with that same gentle confidence that had drawn my attention earlier. "Walk with me?" he asked, gesturing toward the ballroom's French doors that opened onto a terrace overlooking the Atlanta skyline. Outside, the city sparkled beneath us, and I felt a profound sense of completion, not just with the evening, but with a chapter of my life that had defined me for so long. The scared, hurt teenager I'd been would have never imagined standing here, successful and confident, offering second chances to the people who had tried to break her spirit. "That was remarkable," Jordan said, leaning against the stone balustrade. "What you did in there, not just the success you've achieved, but the grace you showed them, the way you turned your triumph into their opportunity for redemption." "It wasn't planned," I admitted, looking out at the lights of the city I'd conquered through sheer determination and stubborn refusal to accept other people's limitations as my own. "I came here thinking I wanted to prove them wrong. But somewhere in the middle of it all, I realized I didn't need to prove anything. The proof was already there, in the life I'd built, the people I'd helped, the peace I'd found with myself. That's what made it so powerful," he replied. "Revenge seeks to diminish others. What you offered tonight was elevation, the chance for everyone to become better than they were." I turned to study his face in the soft light spilling from the ballroom windows. You never participated in any of it, did you? The cruelty, the social games, the hierarchy worship? No, he said simply. It never made sense to me. Even as a teenager, I could see that the people they were tearing down were often more interesting, more genuine, more likely to actually accomplish something meaningful than the ones doing the tearing. Is that why you came over tonight? Professional interest in my success? He laughed, and the sound was warm, genuine, free of the calculated charm that had characterized so many of my interactions over the years. Partly. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't impressed by what you've built. But mostly I came over because I wanted to talk to the woman who wrote The Butterfly Complex. My eyebrows rose in surprise. You remember that essay? I remember everything about you from high school, he said. And there was something in his voice that made my pulse quicken. Your curiosity, your determination, the way you could see solutions where other people only saw problems. I had the biggest crush on you for 2 years. You did? The admission caught me completely off guard. Why didn't you ever say anything? Because you were dealing with enough without some awkward guy adding to your complications, he replied. And honestly, because I was intimidated by you. You had this intensity, this focus on building something meaningful with your life, and I wasn't sure I was ready for someone that serious about success. And now? I asked, surprised by my own boldness. Now I'm 33 years old, and I've learned that serious people who build meaningful things are exactly the kind of people worth knowing, he said. I'm a partner at Morrison & Associates. I specialize in tech law. I've built a good life for myself. But more importantly, I've learned to recognize authenticity when I see it, and real success when I encounter it. Tasha appeared in the doorway behind us, probably checking to make sure I was okay, but when she saw Jordan and me talking, she gave me a thumbs up and discreetly retreated. 15 years of friendship had taught her when to intervene and when to let moments unfold naturally. So, I said, feeling lighter than I had in months. What happens now? Now, Jordan replied, pulling out his phone. I give you my number and ask if you'd like to have dinner sometime. Somewhere quiet where we can talk about something other than high school hierarchies and 15-year-old grudges. I laughed, accepting his phone to enter my contact information. I'd like that, though I should warn you I'm pretty busy. Running a $50 million company tends to consume most of your time. I imagine it does, he said, taking his phone back and immediately sending me a text so I'd have his number. Good thing I'm patient, and good thing some things are worth waiting for. Behind us, the reunion was officially ending. I could hear people saying goodbye, making promises to stay in touch that some would keep and others wouldn't. But for the first time since I'd received that invitation, I felt genuinely glad I'd come. Are you ready to go? Tasha asked, appearing with our coats and a grin that suggested she'd been watching our entire conversation from the doorway. I am, I replied, then turned back to Jordan. Thank you. For tonight, for the conversation, for seeing me. Really seeing me, both then and now. Thank you, he replied, for becoming exactly who you were meant to be, even when everyone around you was telling you to be someone smaller. As we walked back through the ballroom, I caught glimpses of my former classmates in small groups, still processing the evening's revelations. Some were looking at me with newfound respect, others with curiosity, and a few with what looked like genuine remorse. But for the first time since I'd known any of them, their opinions of me felt irrelevant to my sense of self-worth. Mr. Robinson intercepted us near the exit, pulling me aside for one final conversation. I want you to know, he said quietly, that in 30 years of teaching I've never been prouder of a former student. Not because of your financial success, though that's impressive, but because of how you chose to use your power tonight. You could have humiliated them. You could have made them feel as small as they once made you feel. Instead, you showed them a path toward becoming better people. They showed me who I didn't want to be, I replied. Tonight, I got to show them who they could still become. That's wisdom, he said. And wisdom shared is wisdom multiplied. As Tasha and I walked toward the parking garage, I felt the weight of 15 years of anger, hurt, and resentment lifting from my shoulders like fog clearing in morning sunlight. The reunion hadn't just been about confronting my past. It had been about fully claiming my present and stepping confidently into my future. "So," Tasha said as we reached my car. "Jordan Mitchell, huh? That man has been watching you like you hung the moon since we walked in tonight. He's interesting," I admitted, feeling the kind of nervous excitement I hadn't experienced since before. I'd learned to protect my heart from disappointment. Interesting. Like successful lawyer who always treated you with respect, interesting. Or interesting like potential future Mr. Aisha Johnson, interesting? I laughed, settling into the driver's seat of my Tesla Model S. Another symbol of how far I'd traveled from the girl who used to walk home from school because she was too embarrassed to ask for lunch money, much less car payment money. "Let's start with dinner and see where it goes," I said, but I was smiling as I said it. And Tasha was grinning like she'd already planned our wedding. As we drove through the Atlanta streets toward home, I thought about the girl I'd been 15 years ago. Scared, hurt, but carrying dreams she was too afraid to voice out loud. That girl would never have believed that her pain would become her purpose, that her outsider status would become her greatest professional asset, that the people who tried to break her would one day ask for her guidance in rebuilding themselves. But she had believed in the possibility of transformation. She had written The Butterfly Complex when she was 17 years old, not because she felt beautiful or powerful, but because she understood that pressure and darkness were prerequisites for wings. Tonight, I had finally spread mine,